He had to pick up all of Max's slack.
Yeah, that
That's a
guy
lot
is
of
just.
slack.
Yeah, that is.
Did you listen to his episode by any chance?
No, I saw that it was like how to like schmooze your way into business, and I was like, oh my god, I can't listen to this guy. It's like the value of connections, and I'm like, it's so perfect for him.
It is. I mean, this guy has
It's really good, yeah.
He's got so much work from just knowing people
Yeah.
and being
He's
like
the only person that can do that, and like you hate it, but you respect it as well. You know what I mean? Like anyone else, you'd be like, oh god, this guy's such a cheeseball. But you're like, oh, that's just Max. Like he's great, but he's also annoying, so you love him.
Well, what was your first impression of Max?
I think I was just like, wow, this guy's got a lot of energy. Like
Hey,
taper it down a bit.
You match it.
Yeah, that's right. We definitely match it when we're together.
And I can't tell if it's you naturally like being yourself or if it's like Max brings it out of you.
God, he probably brings it out of me.
Because listen, the 10-hour drive to Chicago, like I wanted to kill myself. Like I couldn't not have sound. It was either your music really loud, Max talking to me, or you guys talking the whole time.
And then you put Diesel in the car and everything was fine. So
yeah, and then you roast us in front of 200 people.
Yeah.
And
it's all good.
Diesel in the car? What?
Yeah. Oh, quick. Well, we could talk about that on the pod. Let's not, waste it now.
We're talking right now. Let's just get into it.
All right. Well, best part of our trip to Chicago was after driving 12 hours each way in a rental car that my friend who works for Enterprise hooked us up with. So we got like the family and friends discount. She got us a sweet brand new Jeep and we were all crammed in there. And I was the only one old enough to drive because all these hooligans are like 16. So I'm the only one that's allowed to drive. So my name's on the insurance. It's very intense. And we finally crossed the border into Canada on the way back, and it's like 2 a.m. and we are exhausted. And I had been driving with Max beside me in the front seat. So like my ear was bleeding from him just like yapping the whole time. And so we pull over at the first gas station. Like, when you cross over into Niagara area and it's like darkness for 25 minutes and then there's like one shady gas station. So we pull in there. And everyone needs to go to the bathroom. We need to get snacks. So we're like, Will, you want to just fill up the gas with the car with gas? Like, we're going to go in and get some snacks, whatever. So I look out and I'm paying for we got like Big League Chew and sunflower seeds, like just disgusting food we are eating.
It's a Pee Wee hockey tournament.
Oh yeah. Diet. Like a bunch of bros. We were all buzzing, trying to drive straight for 13 hours. So anyway, so I'm at the cache and I look out. And like Will's like just trying to like shove the nozzle into the Jeep. And I'm like, this is like kind of like, what's happening? And he pulls it out of the car and there's gas going all over the place.
No.
Yes. So I'm like, I like throw my stuff on the counter and I run out there. And I mean, obviously I'm being a little bit dramatic, but there was gas all like outside of the vehicle, on the ground, and on him. And we have to now sit in the car with him for another 4 hours and he's covered in the scent of gas. So I'm like, what are you doing, Will? Like, what's wrong with you? And he's like, oh, like it just wasn't working. It wasn't fitting in. I'm like, okay, where did this guy come from? Because he never filled gas up. But then we realized he was putting diesel in a non-diesel Jeep, which obviously we've learned now that they make it so then the nozzle doesn't fit in the car so you don't ruin your car. But he was jamming it into the socket. To make it worse. Oh, yeah.
I jammed it in. Happens. I couldn't get it in. And I was like, I guess it's like a special like size. So I just pulled the trigger and that's when it just exploded out. That's when it
starts like, because it's not meant to go into that car. So then I didn't realize right away. And then I look up to the gas and it's like diesel. And I'm like, oh my, I'm going to actually kill this kid. So we like drive over to like the next pump. And as I said, it's like the middle of the night. So I call my dad and I was pretty upset because I was like, oh, I'm going to get charged for like ruining this car. Because I've heard stories that if you put diesel in a regular car, you get like it ruins your car. So I call my dad, wake him up in the dead of the night. I'm like, the guy on my trip, he put diesel in our car. And he's like, okay, it's fine. Like, how much did he put in? I'm like, I don't know, 20 cents worth. And he's like, you'll be fine. Just fill the rest of the car up with regular gas and like everything will be fine. But the whole drive home, like every time there was a bump, I'm like, oh my God, we totaled the car. And Will was so like, I felt so bad for you because like, obviously we were upset. I was mostly upset because it's, the car that I rented. So for like the next 20 minutes, it was like, like silent in the car, and like Max was like trying to like talk, and I'm like, shut up, like don't talk right now. And then we all got over it, and
then
we survived. But then I had to bring it up when we had our big documentary night. I just had to like give him an extra jab, you know, just in front of everybody and our professors and everything. I just told that story, but a very condensed version, and he was super embarrassed. Sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't good. Not my
So that's
fondest
my story of our great trip to Chicago.
Listen, we were all tired.
Yeah. Oh,
I can't
I don't
believe
blame
this
you.
is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Yeah, because he's embarrassed, and I don't blame him, because I would not want anyone to know that.
Anyway, so why don't we go into like our practicum? Because I feel like that was the first time we worked together or actually talked to each other.
Yeah,
like you
didn't know you existed, TBH.
Yeah, I popped in.
I was
So the
kind
same
of
thing
like
happened to me. This was third year when I realized that Will was in our program.
Yeah. Well, Will and I have a similar approach to school, like not be there and not make many connections and get in and out. Like this was my second time in university, and I was playing on the hockey team and working full time. So like it was a very like back burner thing for me at this point. So I really didn't make many connections, which is kind of sad to say, but I was also super busy. So when our practicum came around and I had pitched this idea to Cameron, who I knew really well, she's like, oh, I know these two great guys to join our group. And I was like, I don't know like these people at all. And so it was a little bit like nerve wracking, because I didn't, it's on my fault too, like to not like reach out and try to make more connections. But the first time we all met was like the week before the pitch. I'm like, hello, nice to meet you. I'm going to be the producer. Will and Max were like, yeah, like buzz, California sandwiches. I'm like, oh my God, Cameron, like you trust these people?
No, that's Max. That's not me.
Yeah, that's true.
Come on.
You were
I was
very
just
like
quiet
polite
and like didn't say anything. Oh.
Yeah. But our practicum ended up being a very smashing success, regardless of the fact that I didn't really know Sarah too well either in our group. I mean, I basically only knew Laura, which is classic.
Yeah, well, I think we should roast Mose here for a sec, because I mean, I was like, we should bring Mose on.
I tried to get in that group, because I was like, this is going to be awesome.
So, Ailish, I'm sorry to put you on the spot here, but I think it was...
this Mose guy, he just doesn't work. This guy sucks.
I said that?
No. Who was it? I don't. For some
I'm
reason
like, I didn't know Mose either. Like, I'm like, sure, whatever, as long as he knows what he's doing. Because I didn't have anything to say negatively about people, because I had barely worked with anyone in our groups, and the only people I worked with were the same people, like Steven Sahoyas, Laura Ball, and like two other Cameron. So like I didn't really know anyone. It was mostly taking other people's word for and being the producer saying like, if you want to work well with these people, go for it. But like, unfortunately, I knew D Pigs from friggin' every on-air show we did together. Like I only knew a handful of people, and I felt like everyone already kind of had their spot. But oh well, you could have been part of the dream gap.
I could have been huffing gasoline fumes in the back of a Jeep.
Yeah, you wouldn't have made that mistake.
Or coming to meet Scooter and Skeet in Montreal.
Oh yeah,
you missed out on that one.
Good times.
I want to jump in, Ailish, to like what it's like producing and leading a team on a creative endeavor, because it's like more than just like being creative. It's also like business, like you're budgeting everything, you're paying for a lot, and simultaneously coming up with a story, making sure it makes sense, but then also communicating with like people we're gonna have on. Because I remember like we were stressed getting some people on.
Oh yeah,
like
we were stressed.
Like I
definitely shouldered a lot of that for sure, because I was lucky enough, like coming in as a producer, knowing that I would have a lot of those connections. So with the women's hockey players we wanted to talk to, I had a personal connection, but there's also a bit more stress, because that's basically put on your shoulders. Like if you think you can get these high level athletes to want to sit down with us and make it work in this tight time frame, like you have to produce that connection. So being a producer, that was my first time actually producing something other than like, you know, one of those like 1 week shows at RTA. So a lot more went into it than I had imagined, but really amazing opportunity to kind of see what else. Cause I had mostly just gone to like the on-air side of stuff, which I really enjoy, but it's easy in a program like Ryerson to kind of just like pigeonhole yourself into one thing. Like I'm only going to make graphics, or I'm only going to do on air, and I'm not going to learn the technical side of things. So I kind of had to push myself, because I had never budgeted anything. I had never really thought of like a creative concept and, you know, how are we going to make things happen? Like, sure, I know how to tell stories, but do I know how to work with, 5 other people that their specialty is editing and shooting. Like, I've never really done that. So how do I verse myself in understanding like what you guys need as my teammates when I've never really filmed a documentary myself? So it's a lot of relying on the people on your team, which I was lucky enough to have like such skilled people that if I didn't know exactly like what you're talking about in terms of how to light a shot or how to appropriately, get B-roll that was great and not just like me with a camera, like, oh yeah, I got them shooting the puck. Like, there's so much visual aspect that I didn't know. So learning from you guys, especially Will and Cameron, in terms of like how to film something that's not only just a powerful story but beautiful to watch. Like when I rewatched our documentary, like if you watched it on mute, you would still be so interested because you guys were able to create like a beautiful visual aspect. So I, as a storyteller, never really thought of how that went into it. I was mostly like, we need to tell these stories about women's hockey because I'm passionate about it, but think about all the other aspects that go into a documentary. So as a producer, you're mostly like, I'd say like learning and being able to make kind of executive decisions at times in terms of like our marketing strategy and our social strategy. Like, I think that's where I was mostly kind of like, all right, let's do this. And I think, we could just brainstorm ideas for the next 6 months, but we just need to pick something and go with it. And then, instead of trying to fine tune and think of like, how do we get the best graphics? Who do we pay for it? Like, let's just figure it out and get out there early. Like, sometimes you have to make executive decisions. That's what John would say. But mostly as a producer on a documentary like this, I feel like I was just learning the whole time. And like, that's kind of what you would want. I wouldn't want to go in there and be like, this is what we're doing. I know what I'm doing, because I really didn't.
Right. And at the beginning there, you were talking about like dealing with the athletes and whatnot, but I feel like maybe a lot of people listening don't really know what you mean by that. Like, you played with a lot of these people. Do you want to go in your backstory a bit, like playing at Dartmouth? You met Laura.
Yeah. So fortunate enough that we did this documentary on women's hockey and professional women's hockey, and I had played 1 season professionally in the CWHL. So I was a part of that league folding and this kind of approach for what's next for women's hockey. So having a personal connection with this story really helped, but also knowing the players and knowing the pieces. Like, this documentary wouldn't have been as successful if it was a women's soccer story, because I don't really have those connections. So you have to lean into that. I mean, I played NCAA Division I hockey at Dartmouth, and all of the elite players in the, CWHL and PWHPA now had played, Division I hockey together. So it's a really small community. Whether you played on the same team or you played against each other, you kind of can reach out to each other as a ex-teammate, or someone that knows someone. So we were fortunate to get Marie-Philippe Poulin, Canada's top player, Hilary Knight, USA's top player, and a lot of other like really important storytellers to do sit-down interviews with us.
And I also noticed there was like a level of trust they had, and like that goes into like what Max was talking about in his episode, where he's just like, I don't know, people just trust us because like they like us, me and Max.
For sure.
Max specifically.
Not you.
No. I'm more the quiet guy with the camera.
Yeah.
But doing all the work. Anyways, but like, you play with them, and it's kind of like that Spit and Chicklets model, where it's like they interview these guys that they all played with when they're growing up and whatnot. So there's this like connection. So like, you had exactly that with these people, right? They all saw, this is also a hockey player. She gets it,
Yeah. And I think being on both sides now, working in media and being the person that might interview a player, or being on the other side of it as an athlete who's being interviewed, I understand there's a difference. Like, I've been interviewed post-game by, someone I don't know, and maybe you're a little bit standoffish because you don't really know what they're looking for in the story. But when I'm interviewing, Poulin, we were sitting in your kitchen table, and it was so casual because we have that connection, and I can joke around and laugh and, speak from experience. And I think as a player on both sides of it, as a media or a player, you understand like that breaks the ice, right? So if whatever I'm doing in my future career, talking to athletes, I think is something that really, excites me, because you get it. And I think, as you said, the Spit and Chicklets model, like, they are successful because they get so much out of players that, Billy Joe from TSN isn't going to get, because they're a little bit guarded. And so if you're a player talking to a player, it's just like you're in the locker room, shooting the shit or whatever, talking about this game or that game or what, this a funny road trip memory. And it's much easier to let loose and be honest about, the state of women's hockey or your future when you're not thinking that some journalist is going to write like a hit piece on what you said. So I think it really did benefit our documentary that we had that connection. And I mean, I had never sat down with Hilary Knight and interviewed her, but I think that was an example of, it was a little bit colder at first, but we broke through that ice when we were like talking like athletes, right? So helped a lot.
And like moving through the dock to our, event, that was like a crazy experience. Have you hosted events like that before?
No, I've never hosted I've hosted some things like in the Toronto area, like, puck talks and hoop talks, and they're through Homestand Sports where, you're given a pregame show at Rec Room and you talk to the audience and whatever. But what we did for our event was much more of a bigger scale picture with an end goal with those industry professionals, where I felt a little bit more pressure to pull something out of them that was going to inspire the audience and really fit with our documentary. So it's much different than just like hosting a pregame show about the Leafs where you're chatting, you're talking to the audience, and there's not pressure on you necessarily other than to just perform a good, exciting show. But what we did at our documentary with, these industry professionals and with professional players was to tell the story of the Dream Doc, which was our gap, before the Dream Doc was even shown, and to get people like at the edge of their seat to want to understand this documentary we're about to put on. So there was definitely a little bit more pressure, but being someone that had been living that documentary for the last like 5-6 months before that, it wasn't as difficult as it would have seemed, because like that's all we had thought about for like a long time. So I think it went off without a hitch, and I think if we had just played the documentary, I don't think it would have resonated as much with the audience.
No, and it's also not long enough. Like I think it was good to have like
it made it a whole night.
Yeah, it was really nice. And then also we had like the auction off and like the raffle and stuff. But I feel like we completely forgot to explain what our documentary is about.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
Well, our documentary was about this. So if you've never been a fan of women's hockey or you haven't followed it, that's okay. Come aboard. There was a professional women's hockey league in Canada called the CWHL, and it was around for 12 or 15 years. I'll have to double check. And it folded, abruptly, I guess 2 years ago or 2 springs ago at this point. And all the players that were playing it were basically the top tier players, Olympians, college players, etc. And it was the only real place for the Olympic team to train and to play against each other. And, we didn't make a lot of money, but we were paid as professional athletes, whatever. So when the league folded, there was this gap, right? Where, what are we going to do? Where are we going to play? What's next for women's hockey? And so there was a conversation with all the athletes, and they formed this Players Association where their goal is to create a sustainable future for women's hockey. And it might not be next week, next year, but it's for that next generation. So our documentary was exploring, what it's like to be a young girl looking up to these athletes with a league and then no league to play in. And I guess what we were exposing was there's this dream gap, and that's why we used the title like that, because you guys being male can grow up wanting to play in the NHL, and you can see that being your future because you've seen thousands and thousands of people succeed and to reach their goals. Or if they haven't hit their NHL goal, there's 20 other leagues you could play in. There's a lot of opportunity for young boys to prosper and to want to be professional athletes. And they don't have to think about, do I need to have a career? Can I go to school? Do I need to only focus on hockey? Whereas professional women's players weren't making a living wage. You had to have 3 or 4 jobs on the side. You have to think about, can I have a family, or do I have to put that on hold? Like there's just so many factors that growing up as a young girl, if you want to be a pro hockey player, like you're not even thinking that that's a feasible option for you because there wasn't really that exposure. So the whole documentary talks about that. And, you know, it ends in a way where there isn't a solution, which we struggle with sometimes talking about with our producer at school, or John, our advisor. And, you know, when you watch a documentary, sometimes you want, okay, this is the end result. This is the conclusion to the story. But we don't really have that yet because this is an ongoing thing. So I think we kind of struggled with that. How do we end this documentary? How do we, you know, leave people either excited or confused, or what is that final message? But the thing about our documentary is it's almost like a part one. You know, every year there's going to be something different. You know, women's hockey might have something really exciting, like last month, Secret, which is the brand you've probably seen, they make deodorant, etc. They sponsored this league $1 million. If we had that information when we were making our doc, it would have been incredible to understand what $1 million can do. But that was, you know, a year ago now. So if we were to redo another version of it, we would have like meaningful steps that have happened. So it's exciting because this doesn't have a end date. Hopefully women's hockey continues to grow, and our documentary was almost like step one of what's next.
Right, and that kind of leads into a conversation I heard. Do you know Erica Nardini?
Yes.
Yeah, so she's like, I heard her on Gary Vee's podcast, and Mo sent it to me. I want Mo to actually take the reins on this, but they had a conversation like, how do you build up these leagues? Like WNBA has great talent, but like why don't they get fans? Yeah, right there.
WNBA.
It's like the roadshow model, the touring model. Like, how do you think these women leagues can like just differentiate themselves from like these men's leagues? Because I don't know if they can do the male model and succeed at this stage of their development.
Like I definitely think that what the PWHPA, they just need a better name, first of all.
It's a
what
mouthful.
They just need to be like the PA.
Exactly. Every time I try to explain the doc, it's like it's like
too many letters.
Da Vinci Code, because they're like CWHL, PWHPA, NWHL. Like I just gave up.
But what I think to start to answer your question, is tough because I thought their first season as PWHPA, what they did was a very interesting idea. Obviously, they don't have the money that the NHL would have, but with their few sponsors over 6 months, like it was a really quick thing, they were able to have these Dream Gap tours. So they picked, I think, 3 or 4 locations in North America, and they held these showcase weekends. So the idea of that, which I loved, was that it's inviting new fans from different areas, because when the CWHL existed, it was Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, Boston, China, whole nother thing. And I think I'm missing one, but like, and Markham, the team I played for. Whoops. Just a side note there. Markham, Toronto, same thing. So that's the only place that you could watch professional women's hockey players at that level play. So what the PWHPA did for their Dream Gap tour was they went to Arizona. They picked a new place. They went to Philadelphia, like different markets, to grow their, viewership, but B, because they wanted to show girls in that area that they could potentially see this future. So I thought that traveling model was a smart idea. It's pricey because it's, sending 80 hockey players somewhere, probably by flight, getting hotel and all that stuff, but they got all the weekends sponsored. So that was really positive. And I think most of the players were able to make it work with their, a lot of them are professionals. They have other jobs. So if you're a teacher, you can't be playing, a showcase tournament from Monday to Friday. It has to be like a Friday to Sunday, and you can't miss school and et cetera. So I thought that traveling model was a great idea. But it's not a sustainable thing. Like now, when will they go back to Philadelphia and Arizona, these markets they went to? Hopefully down the road, but at least they've made an impact in that city for that weekend. And maybe they inspired some young girls to come out and see hockey. And they did little skills camps when they were there, which I thought was a great idea. It wasn't just about them playing. It was like, let's give back to some girls grassroots programs. Let's see what else is out there and inspire. But that costs a lot of money. Like, even playing in the CWHL, we had 2 practices a week and we had 2 games a weekend. And like no one, like if every team was doing that and paying for ice alone, like it gets costly. So it's about sponsors and it's about marketing yourself, and having that $1 million sponsorship on board now, I can see the ball rolling. But I think the end goal, if I was playing, would be to more of like a structured league, right? You don't want to be flying all over the place and playing one weekend every couple months. Like that's not a sustainable league yet, but there's progress.
For sure. And as somebody that's kind of on both ends, right? You're an athlete and you work in the media. Like, how important do you think content figures into that play? Because, like, you can make your 20-minute doc, and you can spend 6 months on it. You can make something incredible. But I think one of the things that we struggle with is that, like, everyone gets 24 hours and then everything resets. And so often, like, we just consume whatever was made in the last 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So, you're traveling around, you're going to these new markets, but then like after that day or that weekend's done, right, that relationship kind of ends. So where do you see like content playing into this?
Certainly, I think over the last year, I've been impressed with what major broadcast companies have started to do in terms of women's sports, not necessarily hockey, but I've seen a lot more content that's women playing sports, women talking about sports, sharing women's accolades in sports, like, the first MLB GM, like that was a very viral moment. And I don't know if that was going to be something as viral 2-3 years ago. I've seen, for example, there's some NCAA games going on right now, and a Toronto girl, Willow Corson, made this sweet sauce pass. She plays for BC. And I saw that on almost every single network, whether it was their Instagram, whether it was their Twitter. And I was super impressed. Like, it was a sweet play, don't get me wrong, but like, I know we're hurting for content right now, but the fact that each company saw that as a win for their social strategy was really exciting for me. I know there's a lot of smaller markets, like, for example, The Gist. The Gist is a really interesting thing for me because it's a for women's sports site, and they share a lot of female content. But I don't want to have to follow one account to only get my female content. Like, I also like men's sports, but I also like women's sports. So I want to see that become more of an equal share. I don't want to have to be like, what's going on in the women's world, and go to a women's dedicated site to learn that. Like, as a fan, that kind of frustrates me. I love what they're doing, but I want other leagues and other networks to see that that's a positive thing for them. Then you just get into the comment section and it blows up, and I just can't even handle that. But seeing that, incorporating it into your social strategy is important, and I think it'll help change the dialogue. Like, obviously right now, if you read the comments on a lot of women's sports stuff, it's terrible. But the more you almost like shove that in the male face, and you say, like, I don't care if you're going to rip on this girl's sauce pass, we're going to keep putting it on our network. And if you're going to unfollow us, you know what? We don't want you. That's what I'm thinking. I know it's not a win for social to be losing followers, but in the long run, you're going to gain more women's fans. You're going to create a environment that is more positive for a female athlete and a female fan. So I see that as a struggle if I was working in social, because I just it's just sometimes a really negative environment. And then the last thing I'll say is, obviously, social is one thing, but television is the big end goal for women's hockey. For example, we had, during the Dream Gap showcase tournaments, we had the games were live streamed on CBC Gem app, which was like not a television, but it's an app thing. And, you could see all the viewers, you could see everyone tuning in. It was exciting. I actually did color commentary for a couple of games, and it was exciting to talk about women's sports and see people watching it. But it's still not as accessible as turning on your TV. And then when I played in the CWHL, Sportsnet, I think, bought the rights for 2 games in an entire season. They picked like a women's weekend, and they did 2 games and put it on TV. And we as players were so excited. Like, that was one of the games that we got to play in. But we thought, how are we just excited for like nuggets, like little like crumbs, that we get 1 game on TV a year? And like, it was really cool. And you could see all the feedback. People were so excited to watch TV and see women's hockey players on TV. And then when we asked about it, like, why don't we get more of our games on TV? They're like, like, it just interferes with the men, and like they had like a rewind of a Premier Lacrosse League game on, and they had already bought that segment. And you're like, someone just needs to take the plunge and realize that it may not be the most profitable thing at the moment, but it is the right thing to do, is to have more women's sports on TV. But I don't work in the financial aspect of how, putting women's sports on TV might lose your audience, or I don't know how that works. But I just think big picture wise, like if I had a young girl right now and she turned on the TV and there was an option to watch girls sports and boys sports, like I think it would be exciting to have that and not only watch NHL and grow up wanting to play in the NHL. Like that's not feasible. So I think trying to get more things on television obviously is huge. I watched a lot of WNBA during the Rewind, which I had never watched before because I never really had an interest. Now I'm like passionate about trying to find women's sports on TV and share that. So I'm hoping that whenever there's a league for whatever the PWHPA is doing, that some broadcaster decides like, let's just buy in on this and get 20 games throughout the season. It seems easy, but I'm sure it's not.
Yeah, it can be tough with like the business side because it costs X
Right.
amount of dollars to produce the game and
For
broadcast it, and then like how much money are we getting back in ads, and is that
Mm-hmm.
are we going in the green or red? And already these networks are like tanking relative to like what's going on digital, which leads me to like what I've been thinking about is like telling the stories of these players. Like when we're meeting Liz Knox, I'm like,
Yeah.
this is crazy. Like she's working as a full-time firefighter and then also playing games, and then there's mothers in the league, there's like people that we can like learn from, like these almost like heroes, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like these stories aren't being told, and I think they could be told really well on digital in like some sort of short form mini doc, and that could help broadcast or rather advertise the game. Like
Definitely.
I think we have to lean into these athletes if you want to grow the game, not necessarily the game itself.
But what it is, I think, is the game is there and there's high level players, but I want to know the stories behind the players. You're right. Like it's almost like a player's tribune could be done for each player in that locker room. There's something that brought them together to give up a lot of aspects of their life or to balance a lot of aspects of their life. Like even myself, like I mean, my story isn't inspirational, but it's much different than Connor McDavid's story, who had that pathway. Like, we're juggling 10 things, driving, ourselves to a practice at 10:30 at night and not getting money for gear and having to pay for your own gas. And there's so many stories that exist in those locker rooms, mothers that are having to get babysitters to go to practice. And there's Olympians that aren't able to, they want to go to business school, but they have to wait till their hockey career is done to then work on their actual career because they can't do both at the same time because they got to make the Olympic team. There's so many stories. People, like I know people right now that are on let's say the bubble to make, that's probably a bad word during COVID. They're on the edge of making like an Olympic team roster. And in the next year is that big push. So right now, obviously, because of COVID, there's no leagues that are playing. So I know quite a few people that have moved to Russia to play in the women's KHL into Russia.
There's a women's KHL?
There's a women's professional league in Russia, and I think there's 6 teams. It's rugged. Like, I mean,
tough.
It's tough. It's Russia. It's not glamorous Moscow. It is like where I went when I went to Russia, Krasnoyarsk, like middle in Siberia. You're busing everywhere. But they're doing it because they need to play hockey right now to get that edge over somebody else. And what can you do when you're in Russia? You've left your family, you're not working, you're not furthering your career. If you're, trying to get an MBA or you're trying to go to med school or whatever, you can't do any of that. You're not making much money. You're living in a country literally on the other side of the world during a pandemic, but you're doing that because you have to play hockey right now if you want to make the Olympic team for the next Olympics, which is only a year and a half away at this point or whatever, right? So that's a humongous sacrifice that these athletes are doing, and nobody's talking about it. Like, I know this one girl who's engaged to be married, had to postpone her wedding to go to Russia to play for this upcoming season. And, people are getting COVID. Like, Russia's structure in terms of this health crisis is not something that we're seeing in Canada or United States. It's very free for all. So there's a lot of risks that are happening. And you're right, stories, if you could tell that person's story, if you could get that out there, like it's crazy, but it's also so interesting. And then you become connected to an athlete, you become connected to their journey. You want to know more. You're going to want to tune in to find out what happens if this league moves forward, what's going to happen to these players that have nowhere to play. I think you're right. Like, telling these stories digitally is probably the biggest opportunity that's waiting there. And, you know, I think some networks, there's a players only podcast at CBC. And I think that's a really cool, as we said, talking to athletes as an athlete that gets that story out there. But like, you know, as a podcast, there's a one episode and then we move on. But like, I think you're right about a little documentary series about what the world's top athletes are doing. Because if, you know, Connor McDavid and Steven Stamkos and Ovechkin had nowhere to play for a while, there would be documentaries on what they're doing with their lives, right? But it's the exact same thing, but no one's really caring too much.
Exactly. And how much do you think, like, leaning into superstars and their stories would help? Because I look at like Kendall Coyne, like being like winning the fastest skater. Was she faster than McDavid at the last?
No, but
game?
she wasn't faster, but she beat some people.
Who did she beat?
I don't know.
Anyways,
see, that's
like,
the thing. I should know all this, but
that should be front, like, headline news on like the PWHPA website. You know, like telling these stories. Like, these girls are incredible. Because like I watch the games, I'm like, this isn't like NHL level play, of course, but it's like, how do we, if you're not going to compete on like product on ice, how can we compete elsewhere? Because I don't think the NHL tells good stories about their players. They just rely on the content on the ice. So how can the PWHPA or women's hockey like kick their ass in the storytelling and get people invested? Because when I look at like a Ronda Rousey, who was a superstar, so she was never as good as like a male fighter in the UFC, but what was so powerful about her was her story growing up. She always was able to like, you know, be this like badass girl and had great promos and then just kick people's asses, you know, and so, people watched her more than most guys, you know.
The thing, I feel two ways about that. First of all, I think we shouldn't have to compare ourselves to men to get your interest. I love what Kendall Coyne did going to the NHL All-Star game and kicking ass, but it's sad that it took the NHL giving her that platform for her to make a name for herself. She's already that good, whether you put her on the ice beside me or beside Connor McDavid. But it sucks sometimes that we have to think, how do we align ourselves with this league that already exists and compare ourselves to men to get your attention? But that's kind of where we're at, because we're not getting your attention by ourselves. So me as a female athlete, I feel sometimes sad that that's the way it is. Like if I went out and played shinny right now in Toronto and there's a bunch of guys out there and I showed them up, they'd be like, damn, she got more goals than you. But like if I went out there with a bunch of girls, nobody would care. It's like you have to compare yourself to men sometimes. And Ronda Rousey, your example, like she beat up a lot of guys. Well, if she was just beating up girls, we probably wouldn't have cared as much. But the fact that she could beat this superior, you know, gender is crazy. So when Kendall Coyne went out there and did her lap and people were like, great. I think it gave us a good starting point. Now Kendall Coyne has done a bunch of stuff since. She's, you know, working with the Chicago Blackhawks. She got, I'm going to butcher her role, but she got some sort of associate role within the organization, maybe as a player, coach, or mentor. But that was groundbreaking. And it's hard to say, like, did Kendall Coyne get her name from that skate, that lap? No, she's one of the best USA hockey players of all time. But maybe what happened at the NHL level gave her that platform that they thought, wow, let's think more about that. So I feel two ways about how women's hockey should market themselves, but I think there's a way to use both answers. I think for sure lean into whatever the NHL wants to give you, whether it's at that 3-on-3 game they had at the All-Star weekend last year, which I thought was literally the highlight of the All-Star weekend. It was so boring, but the woman went out there and did a 3-on-3 game, which I was so obviously so excited for, but it got really positive reviews and got to see women on TV playing hockey, although 3-on-3 kind of sucked. Like they were all so nervous because it's like, you better go out there and prove that you're good enough to be out here. So they were like, oh my God. Like I talked to some of the girls after and it was like, that was more nerve-wracking than the Olympics because the future of women's hockey is riding on you basically. So yeah, sure, take whatever the NHL wants to throw at you. But I think on the other side of it, let's make women athletes more accessible and more understanding and not just like better than this guy. Like I think when we circle back to the content that the PWHPA should be sharing, and they did a little bit this summer, they had, I mean, COVID kind of thrown everything off, but they did, they shared some workout videos. They shared They did players interviewing players on their Instagram. They did, every day of the week they had something kind of fun. They did a barbecue thing on Fridays, and like each player would grill up something on the barbecue. Like, it's preliminary, but it's at least something that's going to get you to know someone more than Kendall Coyne. Like, there's 190 other players that are really good. But when you think of the NHL, you can list hundreds of players, right? Because you've seen them and you know them. But when you think of women's hockey, you might know 6 names, right? If you're lucky. So how do we get those other stories like that Liz Knox, like who's in our documentary? She's not the best goaltender I've ever played against, but she has a really amazing story. So find those nuggets of those players that aren't Olympic, because there's other people, and tell those stories and relate to them, and show the diversity that's in women's hockey. And they're not all players that went to prep school and got drafted and then played in the AHL and then got called up and had their future mapped out for them. There's a lot of different stories. And I think that will show, why this game is so unique, and why this league that's potentially going to form whenever will be really amazing and accessible for all future generations, not just girls. Like, we had young boys that would come out to the games, and I loved seeing that. So I think lean into what the NHL can provide you, but don't just be happy with once a year they give you a little bit of airtime, right? I don't know if I answered your question, but you can't, it's hard to feel like that's enough, or that's, I don't want to always be compared to how hard is their shot compared to, Shea Weber. It's like, who cares? I don't play with Shea Weber.
Exactly. It's almost like people just get, I guess, forced into that comparison, because it's like there's hockey. Everyone thinks hockey, NHL, men. And then people now bring in like girls. It's like, oh, I instantly compare to what I already, this new thing.
And that's just the way it's been forever. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy to change that. It's going to be really hard. But the goal in the future is that, it's there's the understanding that it's not men and then girls playing a guy's sport. It's something for everybody. And, you can go to a game and see guys, and you can see girls at a similar rink, at a similar venue, getting the same opportunity. It's not like some junky arena in Thornhill that we played at. It's like, we can play at Scotiabank one day. Not now. I know this sounds crazy, but give it 20, 25 years. Like, why can't there be a league that women deserve to play in these real stadiums and have real fans and have gear you can buy of someone that you are a fan of? That's cool. I would love that.
And kind of switching topics, but so you worked at like Yahoo Sports, and they were doing like a lot of, I think it was more editorial, right? Where it's like you give your opinion on stuff. Like, did they ever cover women's as well?
So when I got my job at Yahoo, it was kind of like, it's a very small team. So you were doing everything I was doing everything from on-air hosting to social to writing. I'm writing every day, doing opinion pieces or doing quick news blogs. And the thing I liked a lot about that job was that you were thrown in a lot of different venues, right? But in terms of getting things, women's sports related, it was a little bit more difficult, because with the smaller capacity of people working there, you need to hit those big money makers or those click articles, or you're trying to think like, we don't work at an ESPN with thousands of employees where, you can write a blog and it gets 2 million views, and that's like, okay. Like, we're trying to think with our 6 employees, how do we cover the NHL, the NBA, the NFL, the MLB? Like, it was a lot. And there was times where, I would be interested in doing a women's sports story, and it would kind of just fall on me to do that and get someone to edit it, and we'll put it up on our page. And there's a couple times where I was able to write, personal stories, like when Hayley Wickenheiser was inducted to the Hockey Hall of Fame. I remember writing a really personal story about how she kind of inspired me as a young girl. And that for me was really a rewarding experience, because it went up on Yahoo Sports on the NHL page, but there was no like dedicated page to women's sports. Like, it's a if you go on yahoosports.ca, or Canada, I'm not sure about the US side of it, there's only those big tabs at the top, and those are the things that they cover. So it didn't really have like a place for women's sports. I would think moving forward, that would be something that companies and online networks could have a dedicated area for that. Even The Athletic, like when you subscribe to The Athletic and you go on their page, I'm pretty sure it's like NHL, NBA, NFL, and then there's like an other tab. okay, I know we're other, but like, who's going through that? Like, which casual sports fan is going to go through all that and be like, "Ooh, women's hockey, like, let's try to integrate it into the regular columns of your newsfeed." So there were some opportunities for me to talk about women's sports, but it was mostly, I would say, because I was that token athlete. It's like, okay, Hayley Wickenheiser just got inducted Hall of Fame. Like, how does that make you feel? And it's like, good, because I'm a woman, but like, why don't you tell me how it makes you feel? Well, like, you don't really relate to it. So like, because you never grew up admiring her. So I understand that hearing my perspective is great, but like, baby, why do I have to always inform you? Like, you should understand how pivotal a moment this is for women's sports, even though you're not a woman. So I think that having more, men talking about women's sports would have been a positive, and not just saying, Ailish, you're a female, you played hockey. Like, let's get you to talk about every woman's thing coming up, because it can kind of fall on deaf ears. Like, if you're going to look up an article about women's hockey and it's written by a women's hockey player, you're like, okay, like, I get it. Like, she understands women's hockey. But if, our national NHL writer is writing about it, maybe you're a fan of his work because you read his Leaf stuff. Maybe you'll read his women's hockey stuff because you're like, wow, this guy talking about Hayley Wickenheiser, that's cool. So that's something moving forward I think companies can try to utilize more. It's not just have your girl talk about girl stuff. It's same with, racial issues that were happening, Black Lives Matter, and people of color being the only people that talk about those issues, and that it becomes part of their responsibility. And I don't think that's fair. It's same with LGBTQ athletes having to be the people that tell those stories. It's like, they're already going through enough. They shouldn't be the only people that have to advocate for equality or like getting their stories heard. So I think trying to mesh that and being versatile enough as someone that covers media to see the opportunity to learn and to advocate for people that may not look like you or fall into the same categories as you.
I think what's super interesting that you're talking about is that, like, I think so often today it's not even just the content that has to be good, but like, you have to find partners and collaborators and like the connections out there to get eyeballs onto what you're doing. So like, beyond like your national writer or this kind of top down approach, if you looked at like it the other way and you said, okay, bottom up, like, who are the really interesting, like you mentioned that there's a page that you followed, but you don't want to go to that page. But maybe if you had like 10 of those pages, you get more eyeballs on it. Do you know any, like, if you were to think about all of the connections around women's sports, like brands, the deodorant company that you mentioned before, like, who are the interesting companies that you see that are taking an interest in women's sports, and like, how could you leverage those people to kind of get more traffic and attention onto women's sports?
Well, certainly the first one I think of is The Gist, and they're Toronto based. I think they had a connection with Ryerson and the DMZ because their idea was something that they pitched, and it's taken off. And like, I use them as a really good starting point for what needs to happen, because they're women writing about women's sports for women, which is very exciting. But as I said, that's kind of one demographic. Like, I don't think you guys follow The Gist because it's geared towards women. So, okay, let's take that same social strategy about covering sports, but let's try to make it more accessible for men. Because as I said, I'm sure their page is mostly women learning about women's sports, but that isn't going to help change the conversation if you guys aren't following it and learning as well. So there are some positive experiences I've seen. I think Bleacher Report does a really good job at trying to cover women's sports as much, or not as much, but as much as they can. Maybe I see a lot of positive stories come out through them. And, I know you had Sarah Jenkins on the pod earlier. So she works at CBC, and we've talked a lot about CBC's goal moving forward is to have 50-50 coverage with women's sports and men's sports, which is a humongous task for them because there's not as much women's sports, like we know that, but it's also an amazing endeavor to strive for. And I think that they probably will run into some issues down the road, just in terms of like covering 50% women's sports and 50% men's sports. But what an amazing idea to have and to put it into action. And you may fall short, but that's when you're going to learn. We need to have more women's content creators. Then we need to find, more people to find stories for us, and not just like, one viral hockey play and that's enough. Like, what Will was saying earlier, like, let's tell the stories that aren't being told. So I think what the CBC is going to do whenever this becomes, I mean, obviously right now with COVID, there's no sports going on anyway, but when life goes back to normal, you know, even thinking of the Olympics, hopefully next summer, like that is an amazing opportunity to talk more about women's athletes and women's sports, because I love the Olympics, but you know, the 100-meter dash men's is like the pinnacle of the summer for me. But there's so many incredible stories happening, and I get excited thinking about the Olympics and what CBC can do, like coming next June or whenever it's going to happen. If they can have that 50-50, you know, spread for women's and men's sports, I think that would be incredible. And to keep that going, hopefully to the Winter Olympics next winter as well. I look forward to seeing what they do for it. But the list is short. Like, you know, I've worked at Sportsnet, I've worked at TSN, and I've worked at Yahoo, and I've worked at The Score. Wow, I've worked at a lot of news networks, and I would say, you know, The Score definitely falls short. I don't think I've ever seen a written article about women's sports there. I know they start to share more stuff on their social pages, but I would say they're probably the furthest away from being positive in that sense. TSN and Sportsnet are making positive strides for sure, because they have the TV rights and they can share things and they have a bigger platform, but I still want to see more. And Yahoo, as I said, like they're a pretty small company, and I know that they are struggling with manpower, but it's, you know, hiring the right people in the room that want to take on that side of the job that they may not fully represent. Like right now, Yahoo Sports Canada doesn't have any females working for them, because they had 3 and all of us don't work there anymore. So that's a step in the wrong direction. You should have some female content or video or social people on your team. Like that is bare minimum. And I know that, you know, layoffs and stuff happening with COVID, but thinking if you're looking around your virtual boardroom and everybody is a white male, that's not great. So there's a lot of growth that needs to happen. But those smaller companies I talked about, like The Gist, you know, doing a great job, like people can lean into that. And then I would say I would look forward to what CBC will do with their plan moving forward of the 50-50 coverage. But, you know, I hope that I would have more names to list, but that's kind of the state that we're in, right? I will say I'll applaud some NHL teams as of late during, you know, the layoff. I think I've seen sharing more women's hockey stuff. I know they're just struggling for content, which is part of it. But if content comes back and sports continue, I'd like to see that trend continue too. Not just now because we're like, there's nothing going on, let's talk about this goal, or like, let's share blah, 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 or let's hire females. It's like, let's see that next year as well. So I don't know. I'm never going to be happy until it's all perfect.
I wonder if there's a way to take this like into like your own hands as an individual, not just you, but like other people as passionate as you. There's many. It's like I look at like Sarah on TikTok telling her story. I look at like people just like, I feel like almost if you were to get on TikTok and be a personality and like talk about women's sports, I think there's a huge space for that. Like if you like showed like screen recorded like an old game from like, let's say a finals, and like you tell the story of like what Poulin was going through at that time, scoring an OT, winning the gold medal. Like I feel like there's like a place for that. And if you can't find an avenue to tell these stories in a network, I think it's pretty empowering to look at these platforms that you could grow so naturally on so fast as that way to like tell those stories. So have you ever considered being like an individual content creator? Because you've been on air for a lot of networks.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have an online and on-air personality with quite a few different places. And I think the thing I struggled with most in those roles was not wanting to lean into me being a pro athlete, right? Like sometimes I get it. It's like we joke about it. You know, 100% it helps, but I've always been a little bit like shy to jump in the room and be like, oh, I played pro. But now it's like, you know what? That's something I should be really proud of, and I should use that, especially right 100%. Now. Like I'm not working anywhere because, you know, we were hosting a NHL chat room with Sportsnet, which got, you know, laid off for the time being. So I'm in this period where, you know, I'm kind of thinking what's next in my career, and I should definitely be leaning into that. But it's kind of a way that, you know, I guess females think too. I'm not going to put us all in the same box, but, you know, you want to just like do what you're told and not be that like braggy, cocky person that's like, oh, I know the game better than you. But I might, like, I actually have played it at the highest level. So why can't I lean into that? So I think moving forward, like a tip for anyone that feels confident enough to own your shit. Like Sarah is owning her TikTok thing. And we used to joke about it, like, oh, like TikTok. And now she's like, that's like it could be a living for her.
She signed a brand deal. She told us on the.
Exactly.
I don't know if
there's
it's live
so
yet.
many. Well, I know about it, but there's so many things that can happen if you're just confident and you don't think, oh, what if this goes, what if nobody likes this content? Like Sarah's videos is a very interesting niche, but people now like want her content. But when she started, I'm sure she got 20-30 views and a couple likes, but now it's like, I need to know what Sarah is doing right now. And it's like she developed that content, so I could do that. I can find networks and I can find ways to talk about my experience and things I'm passionate about. Obviously I'm passionate about women's hockey. I've been talking for an hour about it, and I could continue, and I could talk about all the inequalities we face, or the things that are exciting, the positive stories that aren't being shared. Like I don't want to be Debbie Downer, oh, we didn't get this, we didn't get that, but there's so many positive things to share. So I certainly think that that's something I'm interested in, and had been working with some things under the surface in terms of trying to get maybe like a podcast going or something. But it's all monetary, right? So it's like, how can you drive viewers and subscriptions? It's like, it might not be a money maker right away. And that's what we were talking about earlier with having our games on TV. It might not be the money maker, but if you give it 4 months of persistence and you do the job well, you might hit that jackpot. So something I think I would be interested in, whatever my next career move is trying to have it, an equal voice for women's and men's sports. Because don't get me wrong, I love the NHL. I'd love to talk about the NHL too, but I don't want it to be one or the other.
I think what's most exciting for anyone who wants to be a creator today is that, like, Ailish, at least for me, like, you don't strike me as somebody who just like loves Premiere Pro the same way that Will likes video
Definitely
editing.
not.
But like with platforms like TikTok, like even Sarah talked about it, like you don't have to be a pro with these things. Like all of her videos on TikTok were shot on her phone and edited on her phone. And it's just like lowering the bar and like opening up opportunities for people who don't have that skill set. So if you look at it from like an advertising perspective, like maybe women's sports doesn't bring in the numbers that men do right now, but if you can convince 10 other players to get on TikTok, and now you have 250,000 people that are following you, right? Like that's real value to advertisers. And it's not like you need some huge technical skill set to pull that off. Like I think people are really interested in the players behind, like the stories rather behind the players. And if the network's not going to enable you to, or give you the opportunity to share those stories, like there's just so many opportunities to do that on your own, which excites me.
For sure. And I think actually a blessing, if there's anything during this interesting pandemic we're going through, is I think we've realized that all of those things you talked about, shooting these incredible, blah, 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 insane documentaries that we did, the story is still the same if you shoot it on your phone from your bedroom and you make TikToks with a ring light and you do, every day you make something that's exciting to you. And I think what I've realized throughout the pandemic is that you're right. You don't need to set the bar so high that we're going to apply for a TIFF, documentary award because of a TikTok I'm going to make in an hour, or even Instagram reels, or even just like sharing something consistently. And maybe you're not the most skilled. Like I don't Adobe Premiere Pro, like, sorry, no, I don't know any of that. I'm not a Photoshop expert. I'm obviously like more of the storytelling and the, performance act of being the person telling it. And I'm not the greatest with the tech stuff. And that's why I was lucky to have a great team with my documentary, but that shouldn't make me shy away from the ideas I have. And it has in the past, because I'm worried like, oh, you're going to compare my work to someone else who's really good at this stuff. Like my future is not the same as Will's or yours. Like you have your skill sets that are really amazing, and I have mine that are as well. And maybe I can learn to be as tech savvy as you, but it's not really what interests me. It's the storytelling. So I think the biggest thing that we've learned throughout this pandemic is storytellers can be people that have no technical upside, but they are just creative. And I've seen so many cool TikToks where people use like paper to make a story, or they use like, they're literally sitting here on their couch and they can have an amazing content shot with their phone or their, ring light. Like it's actually amazing. So I think that's something we've learned, and I'm interested to see how that will change content moving forward when we're back into, you know, normal life and we have the resources we used to have in terms of shooting and production and studios. Like we hosted that NHL chat room like right here on this couch, Steve Dangle and I, and for, you know, 12 weeks we had not a lot of fun stuff happening. It was me sitting here talking about hockey, and we had thousands and thousands of viewers that were engaged in it. And obviously it would have been nice to be in a real production studio at Sportsnet, like with like lighting and not me. I had my phone light like on my face to try to get angles. Like it's so ratchet, but like that's what you had to do because I don't have a lighting designer in my house. It's me and my cat, and like she's running around up here and like they're drilling on my roof, and it's just like that's the way.
But that adds personality.
Exactly.
Like,
and it was fun.
like I look at TikTok, there's TikToks literally zero video. It's just photos and text. Like
people are so crazy and great.
The content quality is just dropping, and it's more about the story. And especially on a platform like TikTok, I see the TikToks that do the best are the ones that are the like the lowest quality. It's just like an iPhone video. Maybe it's like not, you know, shot very well composition wise, but that doesn't really
must be
matter.
difficult for you guys though, that are like your attention to detail and your creative aspect is using like the best that you can, and you're used to like Will shot that Mars Blade commercial with us, and like it was so visually stunning, and it's just a commercial handheld. Remember when you dropped your camera? That was scary.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
do you know
he
how much
dropped
it cost? I got the quote.
Oh, you got it. Oh no, how
Oh
much?
no,
like $1,000
$375.
Okay, that's not as bad. But still, he shattered his lens while we're shooting this hockey rollerblade commercial. And like, I think like you guys might be the ones that might not benefit as much from this new thing moving forward. And and my low level content creators might actually benefit more. Whereas you're going to have to think of ways to, you know, adapt to what society is is craving right now. But down the road, the way that things were shot in the production will come back. But in this current moment, that isn't what we're consuming. We're consuming, you know, here I am, good morning, I'm making a soy latte, and that is what people want. So it's like, it's interesting for the people that are so expert level at what you're doing. It's like, holy, is my content not needed now? It is, but it's not exactly what we're seeing so much of, right? So it's interesting how it's coming and going. But I mean, like 1 year from now, hopefully we're all back into our regular lives. I see them both existing cohesively, which is exciting because I don't think I'll ever be at Will level. And I don't think that, I think I'd like to learn, but there's a happy medium.
Why work on that when you're already so good at something else? When you don't need to have the high quality.
That's
like
true.
I think if you see a WNBA player, if she was doing vlogs, whether it's just on her iPhone or I don't know, you pay someone to come along or whatever, like I forget that Mose, who was the guy in the NBA vlogging the bubble? What was his name again?
Matthias Thibault. I might have messed that up, but
yeah, he got like millions of views just vlogging that. Obviously, it's a little bit different, bigger audience in the NBA than WNBA, but like he just told his story, and like
and think about like the Raptors have that. What's their show? Open Gym. So Open Gym was also in the bubble, and Open Gym took a couple months to make their video, whereas this guy's just out there chilling with his phone, like behind the scenes, and his was up next day, and he got millions and millions of views. And I would watch both of them. I think they're both interesting, but the accessibility of his being up instantly and his being kind of a personal fun, like obviously his production value isn't high, but you're getting it right away. You're seeing behind the scenes. That's awesome. But then you wait a couple months to see what Open Gym does. And you're like, okay, I understand why it took a couple months. Like they're expert level videographers, and I get a different story. So I think moving forward, we'll have both of these types of content living and pushing each other, right? Like how can this get more than this? And how can we, you know, have these two different types of content living in this world? What that's all we do is consume content. So it's exciting. And I think right now this pandemic has given that, you know, NBA player in the bubble his own platform that he probably wouldn't have thought of if life was normal and, you know, there was no bubble and we're just going from place to place and there's already people doing that job for you. But he saw an opportunity to be like, I'm going to do this because it's cool, right? So that's what everyone is thriving in right now.
But like, I think the content quality is very, and it converting into something like, you know, substantial in views is like, it's all platform dependent, right? So if I go on, let's say, YouTube, like I'm probably more likely to stick on a video that's like lower production quality because it just feels like genuine. It just
Mm.
feels, real. Whereas if I were to go on Netflix, obviously like that's a different
Yeah, you
platform, but
want
like
that
I
like
expect
beautiful.
quality. I
Yes,
watch Queen's Gambit. I'm
exactly.
like, this is beautiful.
Oh, Queen's Gambit
We'll
was
we'll get
so
into that
good.
later. I haven't
Oh my
finished it, so no
god.
spoilers.
Oh shoot.
Um, what was I saying? And I look at TikTok. I mean, I'm more likely to watch like a cool iPhone video. And we had a
Mhm.
guest on last week talking about it, and she was saying it's more likely people are gonna see vertical video and it looks like high quality. They're more likely to skip that because it just doesn't feel real from
Interesting.
an advertisement standpoint. Like if you're a company like PWHPA organization advertising, like if you do this high quality vertical video, doesn't like people are less likely to feel like it's authentic.
I didn't know that. I've never actually been someone that watches like YouTube video, like influencers that like, I've been more interested in it lately to see like how people brand themselves and how people like get viewers. But I think you're right. Like when it's like this whole like thing and like they've got all this stuff going on, it doesn't feel as genuine as like I'm going to review this product right now, or I'm going to try this new makeup and I'm
Exactly.
going to do this like live, press the button and record it. I would rather like, okay, I feel like I connect with this person than when they have this like crazy edited movie that they make about them trying a new makeup brush. Like I'm like, I don't really care. Like obviously like it just doesn't seem as
Yeah.
Relatable to me. But everyone's different. Some people might love that.
Exactly. But I mean, it almost feels like they're lying to you a bit when it's so high quality.
Maybe.
It's like, what are you hiding? Like, what is that cut? That seems like really perfect. Like, I want people to
That's
make
something
mistakes.
you would notice though over me probably.
Oh, I do. I
Yeah,
notice
definitely.
a lot of
All the
stuff.
time. You
gosh.
can't watch a movie with this guy.
Oh god.
No,
He just
It'll
wants to
shut
talk
up.
about the cinematography.
Yeah,
Queen's
pretty
Gambit
much.
though.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And I mean, Netflix is a bad comparison to YouTube. I think a better comparison would be like TV or like a network show. It's like you expect good quality, but
Yeah.
I mean, I just people aren't watching TV. Like
No.
it's better to go digital.
Mine
on YouTube
literally
and-
sits here and I'll stream something on it. Like
Yeah.
I haven't watched TV since the American election was the only thing I watched probably in the last couple of months, and then sports when they were there. So it's weird. Like we're kind of transitioning away from that. So it's all about what's on your screen here in your hand too.
I have one question before we let you
Yes.
go.
Okay.
So beyond like the technical barriers, beyond platforms and stuff, you mentioned earlier that like you're always kind of hesitant to play the shtick of I'm the athlete, so I know the game.
Mhm.
I'm really interested in like what else is keeping you from being like this solo creator? Because like you're just strike me as somebody who's like loves to be on air, loves to talk, loves to do these like on air positions. So like what is
Mhm.
holding you back internally, or like what mental hurdles do you like that challenge you that you're like, I don't want to be this content creator, I don't want to go out on my own, I don't want to like put myself out there in a way that people could like perceive me as somebody who's trying to be like a know-it-all? Like what are those mental, like what's that inner
Mhm.
conversation that you have that kind of like keeps you back from posting more online?
Certainly, it is a lot of, I would say the biggest thing that I struggle with would be comparing myself to other people. And I think a lot of people in this industry realize that it's a very competitive industry. Our program at Ryerson was competitive. And I think that you can get really down on yourself if, sure, I have a great resume. Like I love my work experience and such. I have played at a very high level, but if I look at places or I look at content, sometimes I feel nervous that I'm going to be compared, or I compare myself while I'm filming it and I get like, ugh, it's like watching yourself. They always say, you do a show or you do something, you should watch it back. So then you learn as an on-air personality. And I hate doing that because I'm very critical of myself. Obviously, like I strive for the best. I strive for perfection. I want to be the best player. I want to go to the best school, and my parents have always pushed me to be that type of person. And it's a great way to think, but it's also kind of a destructive way to think. So if you're watching your content and you're never satisfied, great. It pushes you to be a better content creator, but it can also get in your head, and you can also be like, well, maybe this industry isn't right for me if I didn't get that job or I didn't get enough views on that thing. And I think after talking to you guys and realizing like you almost just need to like, you definitely need to let that go. You need to think life is too short. Don't take everything so seriously. And obviously you're going to fail at times, and you just have to laugh it off and take yourself a little bit less seriously. But I would say like that's a hurdle, is, not being the best at something, or not getting that sponsorship or getting that job, like it can resonate with you for a little bit longer. And maybe being an athlete, that's your mindset, is like you're always comparing yourself to other people. Like you want that role, you want that job, you want to get top power play unit. Like it's a tough industry as a player, as a media professional. But I think if we've learned anything from the last couple months and from what's being successful now, is people just being honest and being their true selves and not trying to fit into a mold and not do what like a network wants you to do. This, you must do that. Like, I don't want to work in a place where I'm put into like a shell. So I think you're right when you say that I have that, maybe that's my future, is being my own content creator, where I can kind of take a load off and just be who I am, because I think that that's what people are engaging with more. But my original view of this industry was to be that host on Sportsnet that reads the news and you're very like structured. Where's your personality, right? And now I think moving forward, those roles are less desirable for me. And it's more like what we did at NHL Chat Room. You're talking, you're yourself, you're able to laugh it off and joke. So I think those opportunities is what I'm going to look for in the future. And I'm just going to like market myself more as who I am and not who I think a network is looking for me to be, because then you just live in this realm that's not even yourself. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we think a lot about success, and less about, am I enjoying this process? And I think that's what I need to do moving forward. And I think all people listening and content creators, just like, obviously money is what we need to be successful at times. Like here we are living in a pandemic. I don't have a job. Obviously I'm thinking what's going to drive revenue, but I'm also thinking, is that the best way forward in my life? And I want to be happy and content is equally important. So it's hard at times to see like doing something and working so hard on something and not making money from it. But look what Sarah's doing. She's found a way to get over that. And now she's going to find a future. So I think that's something all content creators can think, is like, if you're passionate about something, just do it because of that and not because of what other people think, or to make money, or to land the dream job. Like if you like it, just do it. Nike.
Exactly. And look at Sarah. Like I bet you she doesn't realize herself as a role model for like other girls, because I know a lot of her viewership is like girls in Toronto. She said 80% of her audience is girls, or rather people in Toronto. I feel like some people don't realize like how influential they can be, or how like important they are to people, because they just don't share it. They have no idea about this audience. Yeah. I feel like you would have a big audience of girls who are aspiring athletes, or who maybe don't get to see enough like interesting people online talking about their experience as an athlete.
I've really enjoyed coaching, and that's something I do on the side quite often. I coached at Ryerson, but I coached, youth teams. I coached at my old private school. They have a junior school team, like the cutest girls ever. And I do see myself as being someone that can be a positive role model and a positive female role model for a lot of people as athletes, or as, aspiring professionals, or thinking about what's my next move in my academic career. Like I have that experience, and I do think that that's something I'm going to continue in my future. Like I love coaching and I love helping, mold that future generation, because I've had really positive coaches, and both my parents were teachers. So I have that kind of, nurturing side of that next generation that's why the Dream Gap documentary was so inspirational to me too, because like those young girls that watch that, they're going to have maybe a little bit of more confidence than we would have had. Side note, I just got the notification that our Dream Gap doc is going to be on the Canadian Sport Film Festival for the next week. So if anyone's listening to this, it's available online till December 7th. It just happened right now. So you can watch the Dream Gap on the Canadian Sport Film Festival. There's a link to the YouTube page, and it's, you'll be able to see what we created. I don't know when your pod will go up, but hopefully within. Friday. Okay, so yeah, so till December 7th, you can watch our documentary on the YouTube page. And yeah, I mean, just even seeing that people, I know I didn't get to tell Will about that till the second, but even just being able to see like maybe we get 100 girls watch it, that's like a win for me. So I think that's moving forward. Something that I am passionate about too is like, being a positive role model to others, because we didn't have a lot of, accessible female role models when I was a kid playing hockey. It was like boys only. So go girls.
Yeah, well, hopefully we get to see you on TikTok, killing it like Sarah, telling
All
your
right,
story.
I'll get making
You
content
better.
right now.
I'll be your first follower. Just gotta make
Okay,
the,
thanks.
make
I
the
have
page.
I have one. I made of some of my cat, and then I just was like, oh my god, my cat's not viral enough. But you know what? I think we can find something that I can aspire to bring good content daily to people. So we're on it. Follow me.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on, Ailish. This was
Of
great.
course. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.